Okay, so thank you all so much for joining for Think Innovate 2022 mini session. This one is intentionally embracing cognitive diversity, backed by popular demand. Think Innovate 2022 is happening next week, and we're very excited to be putting on this technology and innovation networking conference. So I'll just go through the agenda really quick. Again, I'm going to get into Innovate a little bit. And 4:35, the presentation will begin. And then around 5:15, we'll open Q&A. And then at 5:30, this event will conclude. I'm just going to accept. Welcome in, everyone. So we are going to have a few Ask the Experts. So whether you're planning to attend this event or not, please take advantage of these knowledgeable individuals on the Think Innovate webpage. We have Bill Atkinson from Atkinson Strategic. They unlock the voice of business through unparalleled guidance and public relations, strategic communications, and grassroots strategy. And we actually use them here at Think, so I can assure you that they are really, really wonderful at what they do. We have Colleen McKenna from Inner Advisory. She is our LinkedIn expert. So whether you want to improve your brand or just get some tips on how to navigate that platform, you can take advantage of a free 25-minute session with her. We also have Greg Stone from Whiteford Taylor in Preston. Greg has over 25 years in the intellectual property field and is available to answer any of your questions in that regard. That is definitely a tricky topic, so take advantage of that. And he's the co-chair of the firm, and he runs the technology group there. We also have Tristan Balser from M&T Bank. He spent his career in finance, including valuation, trade credit, and banking. And he continues that legacy that M&T Bank has in Baltimore by helping businesses achieve success with a listening ear and acting with ethics and dignity. And we also have Dennis O'Donovan with Profitcom, and he's our technology vendor management expert. They help businesses find and manage the right technology vendor. Telecom, data, IT, cloud support solutions, and a lot more. Dennis has over 27 years of experience and is the creator of the RFP Alternative and is also a published author. At this point, I would like to take a moment and say thank you to the sponsors for Think Innovate. It is with the sponsors' help that we are able to make this conference possible. So thank you so much for your support. And I hope that many of you watching tonight, if you have not already registered, will consider coming to this event. So again, if you haven't already registered, you can scan this QR code. You can also go to the Innovate 2022 webpage, and you can also just check out the email that I'll send after this. And without further ado, I would like to introduce tonight's speaker, David Lunkin. With over 20 years of experience, David is a results-driven senior executive with hands-on achievements in operations, sales, and marketing leadership. And as principal of Cedarcroft Advisors, he works with senior leaders in organizations to help them build effective teams that are empowered to achieve and surpass company goals. And David utilizes the Predictive Index, a proprietary management tool, to work closely with companies of all sizes to create the right environment to get employees engaged and motivated to be successful. So thank you so much for being here today, David, and I'll pass it on to you.
Thanks, Zoe. And I will share my screen. Excellent. So what I want to do today is really talk to you about driving innovation and growth. And really the way to do that is through intentionally embracing cognitive diversity, something that is really important in this day and age. And what I wanted to start doing was thinking about, I'd like people to think back, and maybe you can put something in the chat in a moment, but I want you to think back to the past 1 to 2 years, and almost basically think back to like 2020 and to now. And what was 1 or 2 things that you were forced to change, that you maybe never thought in a million years was even up for debate, was something you might think about changing? What was something that you had to change for yourself, for your organization, or for your business, but it had a positive impact and a positive outcome for you? So I'll give you an example of one that I had to do over the past couple of years, which was when in April of 2020, the world shut down. Most of what I did was in person, working with teams and groups and organizations. And, the world shut down and we had to go in lockdown. So I had to take everything that I was doing that was in person and take it virtual. I also happen to have this really good friend of mine who every year I would see at its annual creativity conference, and we would meet up for a week in June. We'd hang out. We realized that, and we'd see each other a year later. He lives in London. I'm in Baltimore. So getting together and working together during the year kind of never made sense. We around that time in April or May, we said, guess we're not going to get together in 2020 at all. And we actually started to think about like, well, in what ways could we do that? So we started to think about, instead of going to this conference, maybe we could help create the conference in a virtual format. As a result of it, we not only did we work together over the next 2 months to help create the virtual format, we got really good at using things like Zoom and using Miro as a virtual collaboration tool, that we created a side business where we actually have a business where we are doing virtual workshops. We probably work together 2 or 3 times a week. And in addition to my core business, a lot of the things I do with creativity, innovation, and facilitation, my friend Jonathan and I have created a whole side business. So the pandemic said, you're shut down and you're locked inside, but it created an opportunity for us to say, how might we work together across, oceans, and leverage the fact that virtual is now allowing us an opportunity to actually share and teach workshops together. So huge, amazing impact was I changed my business model, started working with somebody who's a very good friend of mine. We actually built out a business that we're expanding and continue to expand. Is there any example? So I'd like you to kind of think about that and think, what are some of the things that you've had to change that you never really wanted to, but maybe, hopefully, there was a positive income and you had a positive output from that? Does anybody, if you want to put that in the chat, that'd be great. But if not, I just really want to think about, I know that in the past, people have had to change something. I'm sure that you could think of something as simple as just the hybrid work environment. The fact that we're doing a talk right now virtually, which was not something that we would always do. But if you think about that, we've had to make changes from the simple to the complex. And one of the things that there's been a lot of talk about, but it was true, is change is faster than we've ever experienced in our lifetime. But I want you to think back, to do this, to make those changes, to make the change that I had to make, I had to actually seek new counsel. I had to try something new. I had to listen differently. I had to, be open to help. And I really had to think about maybe doing something dramatically differently. So what got us here isn't going to get us there, because as we move forward, I can imagine that people are dealing with different questions, different problems, different changes. And guess what? It's not going to stop. So we're going to have to think about, what is that change that we're going to have to make tomorrow. So seeking new counsel, doing something different is going to be really critical. We got to think differently so that we can act differently. Oops. So, to achieve different results, we're going to actually have to think and act differently. If Deming said that every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. So if you think about it, we are here because of what we've been doing in the past. So the system is designed to get the output that we're getting. So if we want the same results, okay, great. We can continue doing things the same way. But if you're, sadly or happily, I would say the world around us is really continuing to change at a rapid pace, and getting the same results and doing the same thing. I know personally, I can't experience that. I know that my clients and the people that I work with are also dealing with that. So it's really something important that you have to start to think about, how do we do something very differently? And I just saw a note that Becca put in the chat, which is, we never thought our high touch service business could be done in a virtual format, but then you have to take virtual services and make them, virtual services are now our most popular offering. So shifting to that has been something that that's a good example of this. So you have to think differently to act differently. And I'm going to give you a little, here's my simple formula for how we can really drive innovation and act differently, which is, and grow. We got to think about who. So, and I'm going to go through each of these and really talk about how each of these has an impact on outcomes and what I mean by this. So we got to think about who do we have? I'm going to suggest that we have to have really cognitively diverse teams. But then we got to think about how do we get those teams and those individuals interacting. So we have to have an intentional process in how we do things, how we present information, how we communicate, excuse me. And then finally, or equally important, is the why. We really need to have clarity of purpose for everything that we do. So as we start to think about growth, innovation, managing and dealing with change, we got to think, who do we have? How are they interacting? And why? What is the purpose of those interactions? So, one of the things that I want to talk about is if we think about the who, I want to suggest that we need to have cognitive diversity on teams. So let me sort of back up a second here, which is I'm by no means a DEI expert. I don't have I don't have a ton of experience in that, as much as there's many layers. I'm not trained in DEI. But I do know that it is important, it deserves attention, and we need to be thinking about that. What I'm going to add to that is say, in addition to the diversity and inclusion in our organizations, we also need to think about cognitive diversity, and I'm defining it this way. It's the inclusion of people who have different ways of thinking, different viewpoints, differing perspectives, or information processing styles, and different skill sets. So in addition to, there's a number of layers that we really need to be thinking about here. And the challenge is that some of these things are far less visible. You can't just see it. You have to actually dig in and start to find ways to measure and look for it. So if we think about designing for diversity, now we got to think about a whole number of layers of aspects. We got to think about education. Do we have people that have different educations, different backgrounds, do you have different values? Do we have people from different cultures that might bring different values and approaches? How about different knowledge, whether it's sort of book knowledge, experiential knowledge? It could also be just the way we approach things and interests. Do we have different interests? We might not think that gardening or painting or cooking have an impact in business, but how we approach those things could help how we approach our work. Do we have different attitudes, different intelligence, behavior, culture? All these things are really critical, but also things like communication style, decision making, perception of risk, responsibility, how we interact and how we prefer to interact is going to be really critical and really important. So yes, we can measure for these things, but some of them are a little harder to measure for. Education, you can look at people's resumes. And for knowledge, you can say, what do people study? Interests, you can ask questions. One of the tools that we use in our practice, I use in my practice, is the predictive index. Predictive index is going to help us measure behavioral drives, styles, preferences. That's one of those pieces that you can't just tell or intuit from just looking or seeing. So we want to really get data to give us objective data about these things, like what's my preference for communication? How do I like to engage with groups? What's my ways of interacting? So that's going to be a really important piece when we think about the who do we have. We really want to design teams that are so we spend time designing teams that are based on understanding the preferences. So we can say, yes, we have a diverse organization, but do we have behavioral diversity? So one of the ways that we look at this with the predictive index is we start to say, well, different people have different preferences. We can measure those, and we have data that tells us. So we can say which people fall into which of these quadrants. Doesn't mean we can't all do anything we set our mind to, but we have preferences and things that we gravitate towards. So as we start to think about a team, we want to say, well, do we have some folks that are driven towards innovation and agility? Who are the people that like to look at new and different stuff? They like to move fast. They like to drive change. They tend to confront challenges or problems by talking it out, by engaging with folks. Companies like that do that are companies like Tesla or Apple, which is like the out of the box new ideas, changing the way we do stuff. Do I have a preference for results and discipline? Am I more goal oriented, rule driven, task oriented? Am I focused on getting it done the right way? Using data and analytics to drive decision making. Maybe like a team in the NFL, maybe the financial industry. Process and precision, those are folks that like to gather data, repeat the process, do it right, ask for the details, the tasks, and actually continue to be able to provide a replicable and scalable output, knowing that what you see is what you're going to, or what you get is going to be consistent. Companies like a Chick-fil-A, teamwork and employee experience, those are the folks that are more people focused. They're more relationship builders. They tend to think about feelings and how things will impact people. And it's really about the customer and the customer experience. For example, if you fly on like Southwest Airlines, they're all about the customer experience, and they're differentiating that from, yes, they're flying you from place to place, but it's all about having that experience and that engagement with with different flight attendants, et cetera. So you want to think about though, like, do we have each of the parts of this? Do we have a preference for it? And how is that going to play out with our teams? One of the ways we can do that, I can give you an example, would be you look at this team. This is an organization. This is everybody in the organization. It's a small group. If you notice though, the majority of folks are in that process and precision, quadrant. So behaviorally, as an organization, the predominant folks are, we call stabilizers. They're consistent, deliberate, methodical, with great follow-up and follow-through. But if you think about that, not terribly behaviorally diverse. So we want to add in some diversity. If you look over at the upper right-hand quadrant, there's some folks that actually are really critical to that business because they bring innovation and agility, and they're thinking about new and different ways of doing stuff. Without them, they wouldn't have the new business development. They wouldn't have some of the unique clients that they have, et cetera. But you can start to see we need that because we have the whole, if we only focus on one area, we're only going to be able to do the delivery of the process, but not the innovation. Here's another example of a leadership team that I've worked with that is kind of on the opposite side. So these folks are what we call a pathfinding team. They're mostly in that upper right and lower right quadrant. So these are folks that are focused on where are we going, not as much how we're going to get there, but then there's folks at the bottom right that are focused on let's drive results and outcomes. This is actually the leadership team of a university. So it's not all the layers down, it's the leaders of a number of different schools that work together with the presidents and the dean's council to drive results and outcomes. So you can start to see, as we start to layer down the organization, we're going to look to see where do we have behavioral diversity and where are we going to need to supplement that, and also make sure that we recognize that some of these folks on this team bring different perspectives and bring different bring different ways of thinking about things. So communication, decision making, delegation, risk. We want to think about all those things are going to be important. We start to think about if we want to think differently, to act differently, this is bringing different viewpoints. So number one, we need to think about who do we have on the team? What are the different things that they bring to the table, different attributes and different approaches? And the behavioral and things like a behavioral assessment and other tools can help us measure what the diversity is there. The next thing is, great, we've got this diverse team. Here we've got a diverse team, we got different people. Here's the challenge though. How are you going to get those folks to talk to one another? How are you going to get those folks to work together? How do you make sure that when we have meetings, they're productive? So my question for you is, think back to a meeting. I'm going to define a meeting as any time we've had 2 or more people together. How many meetings have you been in where you've had 100% participation 100% of the time? My guess is not really. What are some things that happen in meetings, in interactions to make both formal and informal meetings not go so well? I'm going to imagine it's things like people don't know why they're in the meeting. There's the people that speak up and say, we can't do that. There's the people that say, I know more than you. We don't have, or we don't have the right people in the room. So there's lots of things that happen to create challenges in our interactions with others where we have things like we're not talking the same language. I'm guessing I've also had this experience recently where you have the people that are they have a problem, they have a challenge, they start throwing out, we could do this, we could try that, we could try this, we could try that. So they're throwing out options and they're diverging. And at the same time, there's other people in the room saying, why are you throwing out all these ideas? What are you trying to accomplish? There's a lot of different questions you're asking. But the thing is, we're talking about possibilities, and you're really narrow downing, and you're really saying what are all things we can't do. So when we start to think about having an intentional process, it's really important to find ways to get different people working together. A quick story, something that I learned was back, my mom, when she was 48, went back to school, and she actually got her master's in creative studies. Yes, that's actually a thing. She went to the University of Buffalo, and she was in their creative studies program. So in that program, she learned about how to bring creativity and innovation into organizations. And so she learned a process and a language and a system, which was the really cool thing was she learned that, which allowed her to then spend the next 20 years doing consulting inside organizations like International Flavors and Fragrances, doing innovation stuff. She did some work with McDonald's and some other, and MTV. But more importantly, the takeaway for her was she applied that to everything she did in her life. So she took the ground rules, things like she took these ground rules and she just used them for everything she did. So she said, I'm going to live my life by this. I'm going to defer or suspend judgment. Doesn't mean I won't judge eventually, but I'm going to be open to options and look at things in a new light. Then I will actually evaluate the criteria and start to look and see, rank order things. Having a positive attitude. She thought focusing on yes and works a lot better than yes but. So what are the possibilities? Where could we go? Versus we can't, it won't, how will it? She started to also think about posing problems as questions, which is instead of saying we can't go out to dinner. How might we go out to dinner? We can't pay for that. In what ways could we pay for that? Also think about things like diverging and converging, and really signposting to say, are we going for options or are we narrowing them down? So now as a kid, it was a little bit annoying because my mom would do this to me all the time. But as a practitioner, she started to use this in both her personal life and her professional life. And I will say what I've done is I've adopted this too, which is think about with every group I'm working with, how do you set ground rules? How do you have a plan? How do you sort of use these tools? One of the tools that I use quite a bit in my working with groups and teams in my facilitation would be a tool called, a process called the Osborne-Barnes creative problem solving process. It's a mouthful, but these were the guys that actually started the idea of brainstorming back 60 years ago in ad agencies. And the reason this is helpful is you can start to think about how do we have a very specific and clear way of walking through problems or walking through challenges and getting people to interact. So if you start to think about first there's the people that are, there's different communication styles, there's different processes. So number one, we want to think about, and I'll go back a second, we want to think about what is the communication style, the decision-making preferences, the risk profile of the people that I'm working with. Are they the folks who are those stabilizing, get it right by the book folks, or are they the big picture, theoretical, comfortable with risk folks? Those two folks in a room, one might be throwing out ideas, the other one's saying, I don't think that's going to work. How are we going to work through that? You've got to get those folks communicating. If you start to do one thing, which is create some guidelines and ground rules, you can say, here's the thing. We have some rules for how we're going to communicate. We have some rules of engagement. There's some ways we will do things, and there's some ways we won't. You can use this for a meeting of two people, a team meeting, a process. With the Osborne-Barnes creative problem-solving process, it's really interesting because you really take the whole problem-solving process and break it up into 4 stages, 6 steps. And what's interesting is the first 3 steps are part of that clarify mode. So number one, the first thing we want to do is, are we really clear on defining the problem? Often we get together, we're meeting, we all think we're there for the same reason, but we don't actually have that clarity. So the first thing is the problem is never really the problem. So we want to say, let's start by asking, I've got this fuzzy problem. Back to my issue with in April of 2020, I wanted to be able to go to a live conference and teach with my buddy in June. The problem was we can't hang out in 2020. Really, there were a bunch of things that we wished or would be great if could happen. We wished COVID would go away. It'd be great if we could be in Buffalo together. And then I said, oh, I wish we could spend time together. And I wish there was a way we could work together. When you look at that, you go, that's diverging. And then to converge, you go through and say, which of those do I have influence, are important, and need some new ideas? And actually the spending time together and working on working on a way to be together and learn together was something we had influence over. We gathered data. We started to look and say, what do we know? Oh, we know passports aren't going to work. We also know that we don't want to spend a lot of money. We also know virtual is something we can leverage. And we started to reframe that. Well, how might we work together to present this conference virtually? So we went from we can't be together to let's create a virtual conference together. So but we didn't even start to think about solutions for that yet. So number one, we want to start to think about, are we really clear on the problem? Are we thinking about options, or are we thinking about evaluating which options actually work? What data do we know? And how do we pose it positively instead of saying we can't be together? How might we work towards X, Y, and Z goal? So this is really thinking about, are we A, defining ground rules for how we interact? B, are we using them both formally and informally? And C, do we know what role or purpose we're spending in the room? Often we get into a room, we don't know who's the problem owner, who's the facilitator, who's really there to actually manage the outcomes and the goals. So we start to think about these things. Having an intentional or deliberate process can really help to mitigate some of those challenges of, we're not in the room, we don't know why we're there, we don't know what you're talking about, nobody's listening to me. It's really all about taking step one, which was, who do we have on the team? Step two is, how do we get full engagement and participation from everybody there, because they have unique perspectives, unique viewpoints, and they bring different strengths and solutions to the table, which, for example, teaching virtual classes, Jonathan and I were both using our different skills of bringing technology and communication skills together. He brought some technical tools that I didn't know anything about. Third thing is, why are we there? This is really important part to think about. And you can start by saying, which is having clarity of purpose. And the question so I don't know if this is a rhetorical question, but the question I would ask is, if you had a summer vacation, did anybody have a summer vacation? And so you go, yep, had a summer vacation. It was great. The next question I would ask you is, how were you measuring the greatness of that? In what, when you said we had a great vacation, was it because you went to the beach and you loved the beach? You went without your family? You went with your family? There's criteria, there's goals, there's outcomes. So if we think about, was it great? We need to know what the measure of that is. So what I'm going to argue for the third piece is, yeah, we got the people. Now we've got people that are interacting in some way, shape, or form, whether positive or negative. But the third piece is why, right? Why, towards what end, how are we going to measure success? Clarity of purpose is critical, because if we don't know why we're there, and I'm not even talking about the grand why. Yes, the organization has to have a mission and a vision and guiding principles, but it could be even, why does my role exist? Why is this meeting happening? Why did I dial into this virtual, virtual session? Towards what end? What is the goal? How are we going to measure success? Was it everybody got to go on vacation, we stayed within budget and nobody fought, or we got to see new sites and we got to relax and enjoy our time. Or also you can ask questions like, what is going to be different? How will I know what's happened? So as we move forward, we can say, we will have more revenue, or we will have better interactions, or we will solve the problem. Also, like, think about just where are we going, so that we need to know. So these are all different questions we can ask, but we got to know this on the organizational level. So if we don't, as an organization, know that we're trying to drive growth, or we're trying to improve our operational efficiency, or we're trying to target a new market, that's a challenge. But then you work down to the next level, which is we go organizational. Then we go look at the team level. Why are our teams existing? Why does this department exist? Why does this group of folks exist over here? Towards what end? Then you can start to break it down into the individual level. Say, well, what's my role on the team? Why does my role exist? Yes, we have job descriptions, but usually they're just a bunch of tasks. They're not a why we exist. They're here's the stuff you do. What you need to think is, why does this role exist? Towards what end? And what does success look like in this role? Then we can start to think about what activities do we need? What meetings do we need? Why does this meeting exist? Do you have meetings because it's scheduled, or do you have meetings because we actually have to solve a problem? So we can start to think about, what if every time you were together, you knew why you were there, what you were trying to accomplish, and what success would look like. So it could be, we're here for 15 minutes, we need to make a decision about X. That's the only thing we need to do, and we already have the options to choose from. Or we have a problem with, we need to gather data, and we need to spend some time getting everything we know about it so that we can figure out what's important about it. Those are two very different meetings, but how many times are you in a meeting where we think we're doing both and we're not really sure what our role is, and I'm not sure if I'm there because it's my problem or because I know something about the situation. So now we can put all these pieces together, which is, we really got to think about, who do we have on the team? So, and what we need is cognitively diverse teams, because we need different viewpoints, we need different perspectives, we need different ways of viewing problems, challenges, situations. We need to think differently. And in order to think differently, we have to be creative, out of the box, looking at things differently. If we have all the same people with all the same viewpoint and all the same experience, we're all going to see things the same way. So cognitively diverse teams are critical for this, for as one piece of this sort of ongoing cycle. Then we go back to that piece, which is, if you have the diversity, that's great. Or is it? The question is, how do we then leverage that so that we can get full engagement by all the folks at the appropriate times? How do we think about, who do we, how are we going to, are we diverging or are we converging? If we're diverging also with heads down folks versus heads up folks, we have to have different process. So I'm going to suggest that intentional process for engagement is really critical. One of the tools that I use when we do virtual workshops is we use Miro, which is a virtual collaboration tool. So in addition to Zoom, right now, I'm doing a talk. It's a one-way talk. I'm not really having engagement. I could ask questions, but I don't know that I will get responses. But in most workshops or meetings, we want to have interaction. I don't want to just have Zoom and have people talking at each other. So I might need to use a tool where we have a shared focal point where people can share equally and individually. They don't have to go through another person. So having things like a virtual collaboration space can help get the heads down folks and the heads up folks communicating. Also in a meeting, things like having Post-its and Sharpie markers, and then giving people, or for example, giving people time to, at a meeting, say, let's take the next 3 minutes to individually write down some ideas in front of us. Then let's share them one at a time so that we can make sure everybody gets to share one thing. then we'll compile that list, then we'll work through it. Those are intentional processes for getting people to think, to share, to communicate, and bring stuff together. So if we don't have that, there's a bunch of people saying, nobody asked me, so I'm not going to speak up. Other people are saying, well, that person said, had a bad attitude. We want to over mitigate that. So the third piece, though, is that clarity of purpose. Why are we here? On the simplest level, I would suggest, which is, why are we having this meeting? If we don't know the purpose of the meeting, of the role, of the process, why are we doing it? Do we do it just because we do it? Or are we doing it because we know that we're trying to drive a different outcome or a goal? Now, I know that, if you've listened to Simon Sinek, he'll say, you got to start with the why. I'm going to say this can be used in a sort of very high level conversation about like mission, vision, values. Why do we exist? What's our goals? But I'm going to really suggest the place you might want to start is on an individual level and on a team level. Number one, for roles, let's think about the mission for a role, the goals for a role, the reason a role exists. What is it trying to drive? Is the role to build brand awareness and grow sales? Is the goal to provide customer service and excellence? Is it to teach and help and support? If we know the clarity, if we know why the role exists or why the team exists, then we can start to think about having a cognitively diverse team. Well, we may not want diversity for people that are doing the same job in the same roles. If we have 20 sales folks, we might want them to be generally more similar than different. So sometimes you don't want to have behavioral diversity in a team, but you might want some different levels of education experience. So we can start thinking about, how are we going to deploy the resources within it? Is the team wired for that goal or purpose? And then based on who the team is or who the individual is, how do we adapt our communication style, our approach to decision making? Do we collaborate? Do we give people time to think alone? Do we bring people together, et cetera? So who we have may determine how we interact, which also relates to what are we trying to accomplish? And it kind of just continues to go in a circle, which is, well, based on what we're trying to do, now we might need to bring some people in, or I might need to play a certain role, and then we might need to use a different process and be more deliberate to get to that outcome. So this is, in some ways, yeah, this is kind of the stuff we do every day. But if we don't think about, all the different layers of diversity, and we don't think about how we're going to get those folks to interact effectively, and we don't know why, then we're spending a lot of time, doing the same thing over and over again. And we really need to think differently to act differently. And so any questions or thoughts about that? But I will say the challenge right now is it's happening faster than ever. The pace of change in the world is more than it's ever been. And if you want to retain folks, grow organizations, and survive for the next round, it's going to be critical to have, players to choose from, have deliberate intentional process to get them to listen, talk, communicate, and engage and leverage those different skill sets. And ultimately, we need to know what we're trying to accomplish. If not, we'll just be sort of spinning our wheels, getting the same results, which may not get us to that next stage, level, or outcome. And if you would like to try the predictive index, which was the tool I used for behavioral diversity, you can scan that code on the left. If you'd like to get my contact information, you can get the code on the right. And if you have any questions or thoughts or ideas, I would love to be happy to put a message in the chat, or feel free to come off mute and shout at me. Any questions? Any thoughts?
David, are you able to see the chat?
Oh, there we go. Got the chat. Okay, perfect.
There's a couple messages.
Got it. Thank you. Okay. It was just a thank you. Thanks.
Oh, did you get messages from Becca?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. I thought those were really interesting.
Yeah. But
Yeah,
I think,
that's just,
and I think that, and to your point, Becca, is, I really, when I think about a meeting, we're in meetings all day long. Meetings are anytime more than one person is doing something, whether it's informal or formal. And it starts there. If we, communication between one and another is where most problems really begin. Thanks.
yeah, thank you, David. That was fantastic. If anyone has any questions, please go ahead and throw them in the chat. Um, would you mind talking a little bit more about the platform that you had mentioned before, Mira?
Oh yeah. So one of the tools that I would highly recommend people using is a tool called Miro. There's also a competitor called Concept Board and Mural. And what it is it's a virtual collaboration tool. So think infinite whiteboard, but it's an infinite whiteboard that when you're in a meeting, so instead of seeing I'm pointing to my screen here, instead of seeing my PowerPoint, my slides could be in that in a frame in that virtual world, and everybody in the meeting can get access to that. So I can actually have us all focusing on their own screen. So it's not even me sharing my screen. You can just dial in and you can look and see. But what can happen is you can actually, everybody can collaborate in that space. You can get access, so you can add a sticky note, you can draw, you can bring in a picture. So for example, here's two examples. One we might do like a little brainstorm, and I'll say, I'd like people to, or just at the beginning of a meeting, I'd like everybody to grab a Post-it, put your name, your title, where you're calling in from, and one expectation for today. So instead of doing that in the chat and having it be sort of this linear thing, we can do that on the flip chart, just like if we were in a room with a flip chart. Or sometimes when we do breaks for virtual meetings and we have like a 10-minute break, at work, we'd have the water cooler moment. You'd walk over to the coffee, you'd be like, hey, Zoe, how's it going? And when we have our breaks at home, people go on, they turn off their camera, they go to the kitchen, they come back, maybe get distracted or space out. We'll often give a prompt and say, while you're taking your break, I want you to go find two objects in your house that start with the same letter as your first and last name. Or I want you to find a picture of your favorite place. And then because we're using Miro, you can grab a picture of your favorite place, drop it in there, and then we can all see a whole collage of everybody's favorite places, and then we can talk about their favorite places. So it's not just sharing it in Zoom, but it's taking a picture, dropping it in, and then having that. The final thing that's nice about something like that is Miro is you can create the content in real time. So you can actually be adding little sticky notes to, like, over here to who and over here to what, and then output it as a PDF. So after that meeting, you get the meeting notes, click, boom, share those. So I think that goes to really the two pieces, which is understanding your audience. And I'll make another comment about that, which is one of the things that I do is strategic planning. Prior to COVID and COVID, I would do strategic planning on site, but I only did in like 2-hour chunks because people don't pay attention for much longer than that. It actually worked better. It works better for me to do strategic planning virtually for a couple reasons. One, we can have everybody participate, so you can make sure you have that cross-functional team of board members and leaders, et cetera, because I'm only asking them to show up for 2 hours. Zoom is really helpful because we're using Miro. We're all looking at the same thing. Because I'm using facilitation, so I think about the process, it'll be, let's think about all the wishes or goals or visions, and then we'll, by asking that and having people shared in a virtual collaboration space, we get the people that like to think, to speak, to share, and we get the people that like to speak, to think, to get their ideas down and be clear. So it goes back to, how do we make sure we get the right people there? Then how do we engage them in a way that sort of levels the playing field? And what's interesting about virtual is you often get more people showing up because they can jump onto the meeting, and you get more participation because they can put their own notes up there. And the people that like to just type can be like, they might not say it, but they can put it up there.
It also seems like really good encouraged engagement, how you were saying, like using those breaks to like come back into it in your own way rather than just sitting there and being talked at. So I know that we used to do that in my virtual classes and it made a incredible difference.
And that goes back to the if we have diversity, the initial challenge of diversity is we're all different. So we could either appreciate the difference, which is not people's go-to, and it's really the like they're that I don't know understand that person or where they're coming from, so we get annoyed by it. So how do we create those human connections, especially in the virtual world? How do we make sure we say, here's the value of what different people bring, think specifically, think broadly, let's share those, and then let's make sure we're leveraging process, because there's the people that are naturally gravitating towards the what are all my options, and there's some people that gravitate towards, well, what's the specific one that what can we actually accomplish? One group naturally diverges, one naturally converges, and you can use process to kind of mitigate that. You can use virtual tools to mitigate that, but it is all about, all of this is how do we engage the right people at the right time to have the right conversations, and right is only in terms of where we're going and what we're trying to accomplish. It's always people, it's great people, but how do you get great people engaging in the right stuff to get the right stuff done? So that's where I would say I spend most of my time, which is the behavioral attributes with the predictive index process. I use things like creative problem solving, design thinking, just good engagement strategies. And with clarity, it's really just it's not like job description stuff. It's more like what is my goal? What's my outcome? Why do I back to these questions, which is why are we doing this? Towards what end? How will we measure success? What's going to be different? Because those are questions you're like, that is a good question. What will be different after this? If we don't know why we're here, probably shouldn't have a meeting. So happy to chat about any of this if anybody wants to connect. And thanks for your time and for being here.
Yeah, thank you.